Michael J.
So I think that the nice folks at the MTG Arena Twitter dropped some Christmas presents for those who are interested in Theros Beyond Death spoilers.
Yeah, like normally they'd wait till the new year to unveil things, but it looks like we had a little bit of a Christmas miracle.
Yeah, so a little bit on the nose on the 24th of December, they sent a red and green god. So that's a thing that they did. Klothys, God of Destiny. 1 red-green for a legendary enchantment creature god. It's got the stats of an Urnam Djinn and a ton of text.
So it's a 4/5, assuming your devotion is at least 7. Your devotion to red and green, because this is all these gods have this thing where as long as your devotion to whatever color or colors is less than whatever amount, then they're not even a creature; they're just an enchantment.
Yep.
And a legendary enchantment. And in this case, Klothys, 1 red green for a indestructible 4/5. It's an indestructible 4/5, assuming that you're at 7 devotion to red and green, but it's an indestructible enchantment regardless, because it's also got this text of at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. Ooh, that's just silky smooth. But at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a land card, add red or green to your mana pool, and otherwise you gain 2 life, and Klothys deals 2 damage to each opponent.
So this card has got, when I say it has a lot of text, I mean like this is like a lot of relevance, I think, to the probably incoming standard format. Like I can just think of a handful of things that Klothys is going to be good at, right out of the gate. First of all, I don't know if we're going to see the Goose come back, but the Goose can add a green pip and help Klothys get out early, as early as turn 2. But that ability to exile things from a graveyard seems pretty relevant, right? So last week we talked about the cards like the new Elspeth and other cards that have the escape mechanic. So Klothys is like, it's weird that there's like, I guess this is like an underworld kind of god, keeping poor Elspeth or other folks trying to
I don't know even if Klothys is underworld god as much as the god of destiny.
Yeah.
And if it's her destiny to be dead, to die here, then he doesn't want her to escape. It doesn't want her to escape her destiny.
Well, regardless of whether that's flavor something that makes, I mean, destiny, that seems like a white blue thing to me anyway, but forget about,
everybody has destiny.
All right. I buy it. Point being, slow graveyard recursion, like escape, slow persistent graveyard recursion. See, this seems like a pretty good kind of thing to go up against that kind of stuff, right? So the escape mechanic requires you to build up. It requires you to build up additional assets in order to do the escape. And it's not like you're escaping at instant speed, right? You're escaping at sorcery speed on your own turn. So, and Klothys is highly relevant as kind of a grindy anti-graveyard against this whole new world of Elspeths and Hounds and so forth that are trying to get out of the underworld. Now, that said, you have a pretty good jump from like 3 to 5 here, right? If you can exile a land card somehow. I mean, I don't know, like maybe Fabled Passage or something is going to get into your graveyard, but a jump to 3 to 5 seems like something that a red-green deck might want to do, to drop a dragon or something.
So, I mean, it can be worth it. In general, a 3 mana, you get +1. Like if it was just a indestructible that gives you red or green mana at the start of your pre-combat main phase, that would not be, if that was all it did, if there was no turning into a 4/5, and if there was no exiling, and if there was no draining your opponent, if it didn't do anything else, that card would not be good.
I know, it's also highly conditional, right? Like you need a land card in somebody's graveyard to do the ability.
So the way I would kind of look at this one is there's kind of 3 different modes going on here. When you first play the card, it's got 2 modes, and then ostensibly there's the hope of it waking up from this 3rd mode and being an indestructible 4/5 with upside. Because clearly, once you're at the spot of having a 4/5 indestructible creature with upside for 3 mana, you're getting way better than 3 mana worth.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Just a 4/5 indestructible for a 4/5 for 3 is already like a viable tournament card. And so if we're talking about a 4/5 indestructible, that's like light years. That's already way beyond. And so the way I see it, what is the question is, how good is this card before you have the devotion? Because when you have the devotion, you are definitely getting your money's worth.
So I think Klothys needs to be fast, right? So for the pre-devotion version, and I think that because like if you get Klothys down after somebody is already in escape mode, then it's too slow, right? Like that's...
Well, you're getting real specific about tactics when we don't have any reason to believe that that's the part of the tactics that are important. Maybe it is, but I don't know that at all, and I don't know how we possibly could. I'm just trying to get a baseline of how you're even using the card before you're even trying to guess what's the right way to use it. Like, what does it even do?
I think that's fair. I mean, but both of the pre-devotion versions of them are pretty conditional, right? Is that...
No. Let's talk about it for a second. You see, so let's set aside the conditions for a second and just walk through this. What would you think of an indestructible enchantment that at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase every turn drains your opponent for 2? And it's not targeting either in case they get hexproof or something, but it's just each turn you gain 2 life, and Klothys deals 2 damage to each opponent.
I mean, that's obviously awesome sometimes, right? So that's comparable to cards that people have played in Legacy, right? So people play like RR1, turn off life gain, drain the opponent. Well, actually hit both players each turn.
That's so different than that, because draining your opponent for 2 a turn compared to you both take 2, that's just not even close. If you could just drain your opponent for 2 every turn with an indestructible enchantment, that card would be bananas.
Yeah. I apologize if that's not what I was saying.
So, but I got the impression you were describing this as even remotely comparable to because, like, isn't that already so good of an ability?
Yes.
Like, and
it's
then
indestructible for what that's worth.
Yeah, but here's the thing. How hard is that condition to make true? All you have to do is exile target card from either graveyard, and as long as that card isn't a land, you'll do this. That's upside. That condition is so trivial. That condition is so easy. And at the same time, like that condition, the ability to exile your opponent's stuff is worth more than the cost of having to exile something.
Yeah, so I think, like, I'm just imagining a way to facilitate this. If you're playing this in a red deck, right, it's already a red and green card. If you just, like, lob shocks at the opponent, then there's always going to be fuel as long as you can keep lobbing shocks at them.
I maybe, but that's such a weird thing to do. It's not like you want to shock your opponent. You're still talking about stuff that implies you're trying. I'm saying, why try? It's not like you have to try. Play a card on turn 1. You're a deck. Just play an elf or a red creature, anything. What are they going to do? Are they just going to take it? Play another card on turn 2. Just do normal stuff. One way or the other, your opponent is going to have to either first of all, they're probably going to have to put cards in their graveyard, or else they're just going to keep getting hit and you're even happier than you would have been otherwise. There's no way, like, what's the thing they're doing that doesn't involve one of the two of you getting cards into your graveyard at some point?
Yeah, so
you don't have to try.
They got to, like, kill your creatures, which puts things into both people's graveyards, just for safety.
Or there's combat.
Yeah.
Like, there's creatures fighting. Or they're playing a cantrip. Or they counterspell anything ever. Or you do anything. It's not, I guess what I'm trying to say is this card looks unbelievable. Like, that's not a hard condition. And the thing I guess I'm kind of responding to so strongly is the notion that this is somehow a hard condition. The hard condition is if you want to somehow rely on this for mana. But why? That's like the weakest ability. The interest, like, I think the reason that a lot of people are going to draw some they're going to be tricked slightly by Klothys at the beginning and not realize just how incredible this is, and they're not going to evaluate these abilities right, is because of how much the abilities imply a relationship to Deathrite Shaman. And if you look closer, it's not hard to see why the balance is so different. With Deathrite Shaman, everybody knows the mana ability is the best one, right?
Yep.
Like in general, that's so good, right? But why is the mana one the best ability? Well, the mana one's the best ability for a couple of reasons. Well, first of all, it costs a mana less than the other two modes of Deathrite Shaman, right? Like if it costs a mana, it certainly wouldn't be as good. It costs a mana less than the other two modes, and when Deathrite Shaman has been good, it's been in places where it's just super free to have land in your graveyard. Now, compared to Klothys, not only is the land not free, you don't get a mana of any color. You get only a red or a green. And then when Deathrite Shaman's other abilities are being evaluated, you either make your opponent lose 2 or you gain 2. This draining your opponent for 2 is both at the same time. Only instead of having to spend a mana for each mode, like to drain your opponent for 2 with Deathrite Shaman takes twice as long and it takes 2 mana. It doesn't cost any mana to do it with Klothys. Like that ability is the land ability on Klothys is like maybe 80% as good as Deathrite Shaman's ability, but the drain your opponent for 2 ability is so much better. It's 3 times as good as Deathrite Shaman's ability. And I'm saying that the reason this card is unbelievable is because that the ability of otherwise you gain 2 life and Klothys deals 2 damage to each opponent, that ability alone is worth the whole card. Everything else is gravy. I don't think you have to be, you know how like you don't have to wake up Keranos for Keranos to be a good option in some decks?
Yeah, Keranos is an all-star, well, at least was an all-star sideboard card for a lot of like blue-red combo and control decks in Modern.
Right. I don't think you have to wake up Klothys for him to be an all-star.
Klothys is just Keranos for 3.
Klothys, I'm telling you, that bottom ability is so unbelievable. The rest, I think the rest of the stuff is a trick because a 3-mana mana producer that's like hard to do, that ability is worth very little. That ability is a drawback because all you want to do is drain your opponent for 2. Draining your opponent for 2 is worth more than 1 mana.
What?
And no card?
I mean,
are you kidding?
Draining your opponent for 2, like every turn, is that's just a powerful ability, right? To be assigned to a card this cheap.
Imagine if you had a cantrip. It just costs a single mana. It's like for just B, you can just drain. You gain 2 life, and your opponent loses 2 life. Draw a card.
I mean,
that would be an unbelievable 1 mana.
Everyone would play that card in decks that could produce black, right? Like even decks that didn't care about damaging their opponent very much might play it because it's so cheap and it replaces itself.
And I'm saying that in this spot, the paying one to not get that 1 mana is so much weaker than draining your opponent for 2. That ability is actually a drawback. The turning into a god is mostly upside. Obviously, there's going to be, who knows, some kind of weird spot where creatures could get exiled and it's a drawback that he wakes up. Fine. I think that the way to evaluate Klothys is very much through the lens of how does my deck take advantage of or operate in a world where I'm draining my opponent for 2 every turn? Because that ability seems unbelievable to me.
I agree. I think that it's very powerful. And I was actually just thinking that even getting to the 7 to wake him up might be difficult, right? So there's so many ways you can disrupt somebody from getting 7 pips in play.
Oh, yeah. And I guess the reason all this is relevant, though, is that when looking at Klothys, I think that you could get real hung up on the mana, or you could get real hung up on trying to get enough devotion to wake him up, or you could get real hung up on using him as graveyard interaction. The graveyard interaction is upside. Definitely. No question. But that's just not that big of a part of the card. If you had a card that was just a 3-mana enchantment, exile a card of your choice every turn, you would never play that. That's just not a good 3-mana play, right? But the thing is, all that other stuff is useful, but draining your opponent for 2 a turn is already a phenomenal deal for 3 mana.
You convinced me. I thought this card was, kind of in this anti-Elspeth spot, but I see that it's a great proactive card.
I think it's proactive, it's a ramp card, it's aggressive, it's a control card, and it's an anti-Elspeth card. Put me down for 5 stars and however many is the most stars. This is not Oko, but this card is incredible and should be one of the top cards of the set.
In lots of formats or mostly just standard, you're thinking?
Let's think about that for a second. I hadn't considered it for anything besides standard yet. Let's see. In modern, let's start with Pioneer. In Pioneer, I bet you could do something with this. I don't know. It's hard, though, because I don't know who wants this in Pioneer. And Pioneer's in such flux, but its rate is so good, I bet it finds a home. I bet this card is like a player, but not a defining influence. But maybe it'll be a player in Pioneer. So
here are my thoughts. I think the red decks in Pioneer are liable to run out of fuel, right? Like they don't have a lot of the excitement that they have in Modern, right? So they're basically like somewhat supercharged standard decks, but like none of them are great, right? So, and I think Klothys gives them some staying power. I also think that there's decks that might want to fight red decks, right? That like a passive life gain ability, right? So if you're playing against somebody in Pioneer or maybe Modern who is putting things into their graveyard to damage you, like that, so they're generating fuel for Klothys, right? And I understand what you said before about everybody's just going to generate fuel most of the time, but I think that that's a thing, right? Like Klothys undoes a burn spell every turn if that's what you want it to do, and it makes it further away for the opponent to kill you with limited resources. So I think it has some potential play in both like trying to kill people with red aggro decks and then also trying to defend yourself from them. And I also think it's possible in formats where people play like RR and RRR for like Eidolons or Goblin Chain Whirlers or Boros Reckoners or cards like that you actually wake it up. And I think that's way less likely in Standard because there's just not.
I don't know. I think
kind of cards.
I think you'll wake up some in Standard. Because I think that there's a possibility that some percentage of the games you're just going to get into stuff's going to stall out a little bit. Plus, we haven't seen all the cards they have in this set.
That's true.
It's not like we're going to be able to be surprised when they just unveil something that's like, oh, yeah, this is how they do it, you know? Like they don't have to make very many coursers of Krufix or whatever before they're incenting enough mid-range and locking up the game, you know. As long as people aren't just wrecking everybody with like some sort of like blue-white or Esper control deck or something, I'm not so sure that you're not going to be able to wake him up. I just think that draining him for 2 is going to put so much pressure on him.
It's funny, though. If people are wrecking everybody with like blue-white and Esper control decks, I mean, a lot of those decks don't win very quickly. Like, they're actually like finishing the games out with Castle Ardenvale. Maybe Klothys can get them.
Totally. I think Klothys is amazing against them. And I'm not saying those decks are even that good. I just mean that those decks, if those decks turned out to be good, that would be a format that is likely to be much, very unfriendly to getting 7 devotion.
Yeah.
My guess is there's going to be enough incentive that people are actually going to play with stuff that gets up to 7 devotion. So, I don't know. This card seems unbelievable to me, and I think that I don't think it's going to be a staple in Legacy the way that it will be in Standard, but it would not surprise me at all if it turned out that this card was like okay in Legacy. But it would take a weird special deck, a weird set of circumstances, like how Keranos can randomly show up or something.
Yeah, it's like a Slash Panther.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
It's kind of weird, but you're like, well, yeah. You needed exactly the shape to get through this kind of Tetris puzzle. And Klothys was the best fit. Totally.
So I do think this card single-handedly dominates Lava Spike decks. Man, are they going to be extra incented to play with Grim Lavamancer. Because if you have Grim Lavamancer, you can actually fight Klothys. Klothys can't kill the Lavamancer, but the Lavamancer can every turn, whatever Klothys targets, that can be one of the things. Now, Klothys is going to have to point inward, But the fact that your Klothys isn't going to be able to just feast on the red deck's graveyard anymore, partly because the Grim Lavamancer keeping it empty, and partly if they ever try, the Lavamancer can just exile the card.
That's a sweet interaction. That's a good
Yeah.
point. Yeah. But I think you're right. Like the Klothys deck itself is, the bar is 1 card in graveyard per turn. I mean, that's not a high bar. Like the poor Lavamancer has to be like on his toes and using mana to do half as much work as the Klothys. Yeah. I think your best play might be to wake it up so that you can exile it with a specialty creature removal, like I don't know, some sort of Path to Exile or Chain to the Rocks. Because what are you gonna do? This thing in enchantment mode might be more dangerous to a red deck than in creature mode.
The thing that you got to watch out for, as the Klothys player, is somebody who's doing better stuff on the table than you draining them for 2. Because draining them for 2 is that is a really good thing, but it's not a 9 or a 10 in terms of high impact, right? There are other things people could do that are more fragile. Part of why Klothys is so strong is that he's so not fragile. This is a very, very powerful way to get an advantage every turn. And it's a reliable way, but it's not as devastating as, for instance, there are a number of planeswalkers and a number of creatures that cost 3 that if they were to just live could exert even more impact on the game. Like if your opponent had some kind, like say your opponent just had whatever the best new Ophidian thing is, where they're hitting you for some damage, drawing a card every turn, they're getting the better of it compared to your draining them for 2. So you don't want to just fall behind. The other thing is that if your opponent's just playing out a bunch of threats, if they spend their 3 mana playing a 5/4, for instance, in Pioneer or whatever, they might start clobbering you more than the advantage you get from Klothys. Like if both you and your opponent are both completely proactive and ignoring each other, Klothys is not the fastest goldfish. And so that's, I think, the weakness. I think that people who try to stop what you're doing are going to be really frustrated by Klothys because of how durable of a threat he is, how much he hits from different angles that they might not be prepared for, how many tactical implications there are to using Klothys. But if you're both in goldfish mode, that's not where Klothys shines.
No. The only thing, not to complain too much about Klothys in standard context, I think it's going to be tough for Klothys to hit a Cauldron Familiar. Not impossible, but that's not a fight that Klothys is looking for, despite the fact that they seem to fit together so well.
One thing you got to watch out for, Leyline of the Void really does some damage to Klothys.
Turns Klothys off, right?
Short of the turning into a creature, it turns off the enchantment ability. And as well, if there's any card that makes it so that you can't target cards in graveyards or whatever, all that's going to be phenomenal counterplay against Klothys. But it's not very reliable if graveyard hate. And so I think you got to be careful because it's not like it's going to be easy to snag a cat with Klothys. I think you're right, though. It's not going to be impossible, but I wouldn't count on that as your plan.
I think that the fact that you are getting some graveyard hate along with these other abilities, primarily that kind of drain you for 2 ability every turn, is nice, right? It's part of the card, and it's probably going to ruin some days in a nicely surprising way for Klothys players. I think that the trap is just to rely on it as your anti-graveyard card instead of having a specialized card if you're playing a format where you need to deal with graveyards.
Yeah, totally. This is not like some Tormod's Crypt or something. It helps, but it's not even a scavenging ooze, you know.
Scavenging ooze that guy is a monster.
But this guy's ability as a proactive threat, I think, is going to be so powerful, and it's going to force people to try to. I love this design, incidentally. I mean, I can't speak to the power level that it will have in context. It looks fantastic to me, but a lot of things looked fantastic until Oko. So I don't know. It's like I'll have to see, we'll see how well everything is balanced and comes together. But this card looks really sweet because it looks better than normal things, but it looks like there's subtly a lot of interaction points. This card can be bounced or exiled. It doesn't have hexproof. It's indestructible, but it can be bounced and exiled and counterspelled. It can be stolen. It can be graveyards. Could be like if somebody else removes all the cards in graveyards, then you can't use Klothys. Like there's a lot of different parts of this card and ways to fight this. Outside of the fact that you can just keep it off you, if you can keep the devotion down, you might be able to outrace a 2-life drain a turn. I think this design looks sweet and is shaping up to be a defining card in the standard format, and a role player in other formats like Pioneer and Modern.
I think I'm where you are. So on Christmas itself, on the 25th of December, the day after Klothys was revealed, the nice people at Wizards of the Coast gave us another card that is devotion dependent, that takes life from one player and gives it to the other. Our old buddy, the Gray Merchant of Asphodel.
Yeah. So what do you think, man? Gray Merchant's back.
I think this card is going to be a player in Standard.
Player like a role player, or a player like a all-star?
I mean, like, it's going to have, like, purple sunglasses on and the corner table, rolling dice with a velour jacket. That kind of player.
Oh, so given too much credit, might get lucky sometimes, not the one to actually be copying the style of, despite how rich they look.
They'll be there, and their wins will be spectacular. All those things. Yeah, but it will certainly be played, right? That's the thing I'm thinking.
Sure.
And
is it going to be good though? Like, is it going to live up to its reputation?
It's got purple sunglasses and the velour jacket. It's going to be great sometimes.
I don't know if you're dodging the question though. Like, it's got this lofty reputation. Will it live up to it?
I think that what it doesn't fit into my current concept of Standard that well contextually, but that concept might change. Like, maybe there's going to be way different decks like a month from now. Like, this card is, like, irrelevant against somebody who's doing, like, the kind of giant blue and green pig, ramp, Nissa stuff, right? It doesn't interact with any of their stuff other than to, like, get, like, a medium-sized drain, and then they hit you and steal all your stuff, right? Like, that's not cool. But if people are, like, actually trying to damage your life total, and they're not very good at dealing with creatures on the battlefield, it could be, like, it's a ton of damage if you have creatures in play.
So I think that answer, honestly,
Yep.
All jokes aside, I was so ready to make a joke or a comeback regarding, like, because I do think Gray Merchant of Asphodel is a little overrated, but I could see it being good. But your answer was actually so perfect that I kind of want to unpack it a little bit there, because I think that's actually a really, really important thing that people don't always give enough credit to, particularly during spoiler season when there's a new set. And that's that I think your description was so perfect. Gray Merchant of Asphodel doesn't really fit into my current conception of Standard either. Like, the way that I think about the existing stuff, it's not the same thing as not having a home. They're related. But it's not just that there isn't a home. It's that the advantages that Gray Merchant brings and the conditions that are generally that we would expect to be true for Gray Merchant to really shine are not in line with the types of things and incentives that we've been seeing at all. It's not just that people didn't build the deck where Gray Merchant would be perfect if only they had Gray Merchant. It's not like that at all. It's just that when you're like, if a format has a deck that has 16 counterspells that are cheap and a bunch of tempo cards, that's not necessarily imbalance. That's not necessarily Gray Merchant's place to shine. And if the format had a bunch of, like, blue-white decks that go super duper duper big, that have 8-9 sweepers, a bunch of really powerful brain geysers, and that's not Gray Merchant's spot either. However, if the format was, say, Klothys, God of Destiny, was like a really defining player. I think this card looks really strong. I think Klothys, God of Destiny, looks really good against blue-green and blue-white control. Anyway, he is good in the existing framework. But if more stuff like Klothys is the stuff that is the new framework, I think Gray Merchant is fantastic against stuff like Klothys, God of Destiny. If somebody's playing a game where instead of like killing all your creatures, they're like establishing a big board themselves and they're trying to wake up their 4/5 and they're giving you time to establish a big board, but they're pressuring your life total. When you play Gray Merchant and undo 7 turns of Klothys in one shot, that's backbreaking sometimes. And so I think your description is actually brilliant, which is the Gray Merchant. Maybe it's easy to slam this guy, and I was actually going to be guilty of the same thing because of how much I'm used to the existing framework now, where this isn't what it's about. But it's important when evaluating the cards to not just imagine what it's like with the existing cards or with the types of things that have been relevant. Maybe there's a game changer or two in this. Like Field of the Dead changed so many basic assumptions that like your assumptions from before Field of the Dead existed aren't really valid anymore after Field of the Dead is around. And so maybe there's enough stuff. It could easily be the case that in this set, the rules of engagement change and Gray Merchant could become a major player. And even if it's not a good world for Gray Merchant, it's probably still a fringe player. So I got to give it to you. I think and it's a good reminder of how important it is when evaluating these new cards to imagine the other worlds too. Like, what is the circumstance where this card would shine?
So Gray Merchant can potentially curve out in the mono black deck, other than the fact that the mono black deck doesn't currently have enough mana to support 5-drops. But like, it's not hard to imagine a little bit further forward, right? Like, if that deck is already playing cards like Yarok's Familiar at 2, which is, kind of a 187 2-drop with 2 black pips, and then Ayara, the First of Lochwain at 3, which has 3 black pips. Like, you can imagine like this kind of curve progression of somewhat aggressive value-generating creatures that can chain up to a 5. I think like
chain, or just like you're curving up,
yeah,
like you're going.
Yeah, it's not really
2,
chain.
3,
it's just
you're
like
going 2, 3, 4, and then a 5.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem is like you kind of have to draw your cards in the right order, which is a big question mark for a card like, or at least in the context that I'm saying, because this deck can't really pick that at this point. But you can imagine like getting a bunch of black pips in play with cards that people are playing already, but it's already like a fringe strategy that doesn't have enough land for this. Right? And if you put it in a deck that has like way more land and is more controlling, then you don't have that high impact of a Gray Merchant when it hits. I mean, unless you have permanents other than creatures that you're getting your black pips from.
Well, there's 2 other parts of Gray Merchant that I think are important to be calling out here. The first is that on the note of non-creature permanents that are contributing to your devotion and how are you going to get up to 5 mana reliably and so on, one of the things to really be on the lookout for that I'm guessing they're going to have something in the set to satisfy is some sort of an Underworld Connections or Phyrexian Arena. My guess is that this set will have something in that space where you can be trading some amount of life to get some amount of extra cards in a black deck. And if you can, some sort of a Phyrexian Arena type deal would be incredible for Gray Merchant of Asphodel.
Yeah, so in that case, you have access to additional black pips that are not vulnerable to creature removal, and then you also have something to do with the life, right? So you're paying life to draw extra cards, and then you're getting life back with Gray Merchant. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That was Gray Merchant's last time around in Standard. There was a lot of cards.
Underworld Connections, yeah. The other part is that even though this wasn't very relevant last time, it could easily turn out to be relevant this time, which is that Gray Merchant is a zombie.
Oh,
that's not a trivial creature type historically. And even if there aren't like a bunch of zombie strategies right now, there are some zombies, and it would not be hard to imagine new cards getting made that could actually turn that into a real big upside. And even if this set isn't the set that has all the zombie support, I could easily imagine a couple sets from now, Gray Merchant taking on a whole new meaning if like a year from now there's just like a whole bunch of zombies. Because like when the zombies are like tokens created by an amass army, that's not exactly contributing to your devotion.
No, it contributes 0, right? And it doesn't even contribute multiple bodies if you're doing it multiple times.
But that's exactly the type of creature type that to keep an eye on, because it could really, really, it could spike a ton.
Just on the note, of cards that generate zombie tokens, though, I think Grey Merchant might potentially be buddies with Liliana 6, right? So
Totally.
You just get some black pips that aren't on a creature, and it's not unheard of for people to play Cauldron Familiars and Witches Ovens in concert with Liliana. Right? That's kind of like a little sub game you got there that has some triggers that might be useful, and it's also the kind of a setup with those other cards that might buy you enough time to make Grey Merchant relevant, right? So the situation you don't want to be in is it's turn 5 or so, or even worse after turn 5, and you're playing a 5-drop on turn 5, and you're like, tap 5, 2/4, drain you for 2, go, right? You don't want to be in that spot. Right, so you need to have some machinery to make this card potentially worthwhile, and I think typically that means, if you've got creatures that they were durable enough that the opponent didn't kill them all, or if you don't, that you have some other kinds of permanents with black pips that can help pay the merchant.
I don't know, man. I agree. Isn't there already kind of a fair bit of architecture for that 2-3-4 sort of curve thing you were describing in the form of all these adventure creatures? Foulmire Knight isn't exactly the same thing, but it speaks to sort of a similar thing and could defend you early if you needed to, but it can contribute to that card advantage. The Murderous Rider is obviously the perfect card for a deck like this.
Oh, man, Murderous Rider is great.
Absolutely. That's just fantastic for what's going on here. And then even the guy who can't block, the 2/2?
Order of Midnight?
Yeah. That, because I would get back Grey Merchant with the Order of Midnight. But something that's kind of interesting to me is that Foulmire Knight is a zombie, and Murderous Rider is a zombie. Rotting Regisaur is a zombie.
Yeah, that's the zombie I care for.
Midnight Reaper is a zombie. Gravedigger, God Eternal Bantu, Corpse Knight. It would not take all that much. And maybe, even if you end up in another color, Dreadhorde Butcher has a black pip, and Corpse Knight has a black pip. Because even if you're trying to be a devotion to black deck, I could easily imagine you still being 2 colors. You just keep your permanents 1 color for the most part,
Or, you don't even have to, right?
It's the same as one.
That's just a good card, right?
Yeah, it's the same as if the card was 1 and a black, right?
Yep.
Just because the card costs 1 and a black doesn't mean you wouldn't play it. So I think you got me more excited about Grey Merchant than I was initially, particularly since I kind of got a feeling. I sure hope they actually put in some infrastructure to make this something good going on, because that would be pretty dope.
You could play it, just riffing on zombies. What's that guy who's white and a black, and then he drains when you...
Corpse Knight. That's Corpse Knight.
Okay, yeah, Corpse Knight. Yeah, that seems very, very on theme for this card.
Totally. So, I could see it. I think we're going to have to see what more there is. I do think that they kind of dropped it without enough context yet, at least partially because of sort of its reputation.
Yeah.
But I actually think some of its reputation, it's important to note, some of its reputation is stemming from the fact that it was kind of just an absurd draft card. And it stacks so well, right? When you have 4 Grey Merchants in your deck, it's just unbelievable.
Was it common?
But it was a common.
Yeah. Not this
now,
time.
Right, now that it's an uncommon, I don't think you're going to stack them so easily, which is a little bit of a strike against it,
As a limited card, yeah. But I think you're right that the context matters so much, and we don't know a lot of the context. This time last spoiler season, we were like, what is a food? Why would that be interesting to me to make one? So maybe new things will be revealed that are gonna scratch our itches like that.
Dude, Cavalier of Night has a lot of black pips.
That's a solid card.
Dreadhorde Invasion's got one.
Dreadhorde Invasion.
Yeah. Make a 1/1 every turn, or keep giving your guy +1/+1.
Just props to you. Remember, I was super excited about that card, and you're like, "This card is not good, and it's worse than the Urg Raider."
Dead Weight. That's kind of a cool way to get an extra black pip, because sometimes you're going to put it on a 2/3, and then it'll just sit and play, giving you some devotion.
Yeah.
The Dread Presence only has a single black pip to contribute, but if you're playing him on a black deck, that guy could be on theme. You know, the ability to drain 2 to any target, or to let you necro. You draw a card and you lose a life. I mean, it's a little fragile, but that card could be sweet.
I think I'm down for what you were talking about before with regards to multiple colors. Like, Ethereal Absolution, for example, seems like a card I would totally be fine having in the same deck as Grey Merchant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like,
sure.
I got a black pip, fine. Costs me a white pip, but then I just have this comfort of not automatically losing to the Cauldron Familiar combo.
Mm-hmm. Masker Girl, 2 more pips. Sworn Knight, maybe that's 2 pips. I mean, if you want that. Rankle, Master of Pranks, that's 2 pips. Priest of Forgotten Gods is just downright awesome.
I mean,
even if it's only 1 pip.
Fantastic.
Yeah, even if Spawn of Mayhem, that's another good place for a couple. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, man. That's very cool. Obviously, I think people are going to start with like Urox, Fenlurker, and Arail, just because of the amount of the pips and how much they kind of speak to a strategy that was just missing a top. But I do think that part of the equation is going to be what is the new Thoughtseas?
Well, here's some cards that might be interesting that have black pips in them. Bolas's Citadel has 3 black pips.
That's the huge one.
Right? And then
that's like the biggest one there is.
Wishclaw Talisman has a black pip, and if you Wishclaw Talisman for Ashiok, that ain't bad, right? So Wishclaw Talisman for Ashiok, they get the Wishclaw Talisman. Ashiok contributes 2 more black pips, and they can't even really use the Wishclaw Talisman without dealing with the Ashiok first.
I guess, but
is that just like an utter waste of like?
Well, no, I mean, what if you skip to the part? What if you skipped the part involving the Witchclaw, and you just went straight to whatever you wanted to do, like say Ashiok or whatever? Like, it's super weird to use a demonic tutor that then all it does is suppress your opponent's ability to play the demonic tutor you gave them.
Look, man, I'm collecting black pips right now, successfully.
We'll do Leyline of the Void.
Yeah.
That's some black pips, man. Right?
And it messes up Klothys. Like, depending on how popular Klothys is, you might... I don't know, maybe there's an 8-pack in your sideboard. You know, London Mulligan that thing out. Mess up their Klothys and then get paid back for 4 each time, at least, if not more.
God, isn't Bolas's Citadel just amazing with Grey Merchant, though?
Yeah, it's a lot of pips. The thing is, like...
Well, it's also 10 life. Right? Like, all you have to do is get 10 out of the Grey Merchant, and Bolas's Citadel can do the other 10.
Man, I was suspending in my brain for a second that Bolas's Citadel actually did anything while it was in play. But, you know, if you're going to go that direction, yeah, that card can kill you. And it could draw a bazillion cards, obviously.
To me, that sounds like step one. That Bolas's Citadel is the Underworld Connections Phyrexian Arena that we have so far. I mean, there's other variations, but Bolas's Citadel seems to be the one that's just so perfect for Grey Merchant.
I'm down.
So what else? Those are the only 2 most recently, but there's some other ones we haven't talked about yet, right?
Yeah, they're like a bunch of like 5 and 7 casting cost like fatties we can talk about. I think that's the stuff that they released, and they've got gold set symbols, so clearly they're all fantacular.
Well, so what about Revoke Existence? 1 and a white sorcery, exile target artifact or enchantment, which can exile something such as an indestructible god like Klothys.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be a really important card in the format for exactly that reason. So I was just thinking that one of the things that's great about Klothys is that as a 3 casting cost legendary indestructible enchantment, it gets under Despark. But Revoke Existence can clean that Klothys right up before they even get 1 activation, actually.
All right, you want some predictions from me?
Sure.
Dude, 1. There's going to be some kind of a Thoughtseize. I don't know if it's going to be like an Inquisition of Kozilek or what, but I bet there's going to be a powerful price to move Thoughtseize in this set.
Yeah? I would be excited to collect those and play them in my deck that could cast it, because those cards are always great.
Like, maybe it's Thoughtseize itself. Maybe it's Inquisition of Kozilek. Maybe it's something else.
Inquisition of Kozilek? No way to reprint that card.
Well, they could make a new one. I'm saying they wouldn't do actual Inquisition of Kozilek. It's too much of a flavor break. I think they're going to do a very powerful 1-mana discard spell, or possibly a 2-mana discard spell. But I think they're going to do a powerful, probably 1-mana discard spell. It just looks so much like the world that they're talking about. And I actually think Inquisition of Kozilek would be perfect.
Do you think, a
new Inquisition of Kozilek that's flavored to Theros gods or whatever?
Like, better than Blackmail. A card better than Blackmail, you're thinking.
I'm talking about exactly Inquisition of Kozilek.
Wow. That card is first of all, obviously it would be exciting for that card to exist, but I'm just thinking, like, in formats where you could play more than one kind of Inquisition of Kozilek, people immediately would.
Yeah, maybe, but formats where you can play more than one Inquisition of Kozilek are formats where Thoughtseize is legal. And I don't know that do you really want 5 Inquisitions compared to, like, it's not like maybe you would play a 5th Inquisition sometimes because you're like, well, I'm playing 4 Thoughtseize and 5 Inquisition. I bet it's fine, but they also might just print Thoughtseize. They freaking love just making Thoughtseize or whatever. And the fact that they already made a Murderous Rider, they could just make another. If I were them, I'm trying to put myself in the mentality of what it's like to be developing Beyond Death, Theros Beyond Death, in a world where you've made Teferi, Time Raveler, and you know that it's crazy good. You made Oko, and maybe you don't realize how good it is yet.
But you know it's good.
But you know it's good. And when you've made Liliana, when you've made not just any of the 3s, I mean, like Vivian, when you're making all these 3-cost planeswalkers, it's so obvious that one of the places you go to is making an Inquisition of Kozilek that can hit things that cost 3 or less. So I hope that they went the Inquisition. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but that's one prediction, is that there's going to be a discard spell that is priced to frickin' move, whether it's a Thoughtseize Inquisition or some new thing that's very similar to one of them, or both. I actually, my preference would be that they make some new one that's kind of like Inquisition of Kozilek, but maybe with a little bit more upside in some way, but also paying some life. I think that's sweet. Like a Thoughtseize where you pay life, but it doesn't hit everything, but it has some other benefit. Like maybe it exiles the card or whatever. I don't know. Excited about all that, but another prediction. I think there's going to be a card that's like Brimaz, the OG Brimaz, like 3/4 for 3. That Brimaz.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some sort of a cheap-ish, like 3 or 4 cost creature with vigilance that gives you value every time it attacks.
I like Brimaz. I always played him.
Totally. The big wild card to me, and I could just see it going a lot of different ways, but I hope they don't make it about Nykthos again.
The actual Nykthos. The actual
Nykthos, right.
Card that is, top 8ing every Pioneer tournament. That one.
Right, and I could imagine, like, so for instance, like when they jump through all those hoops to try to not ban Nykthos in Pioneer?
Well, they've successfully not done that so far.
They've jumped through a lot of hoops. They've banned a lot of other cards to not ban Nykthos. And to me, that is evidence maybe it's not going to, maybe it doesn't really play out that way, but that's at least some amount of evidence. Now there's also the very likely possibility that they just want Nykthos because it will work so well with the rest of the set and blah, 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 right? But also, what would you do if you were them and Nykthos was actually in the set? Well, you certainly don't want it to come out and already be banned, right?
I mean, that's just Oko again.
So, my guess is that probably Nykthos isn't there, but I could imagine it. My confidence is low, you know?
I'd like Nykthos. You know, I feel like Nykthos never really, like, ruined Standard. It was just a good card, one of many different good things you could play, right? And it was played in, like, 3 different Nykthos strategies, more than 3. As
far as lands that produce more than 1 mana go, it is one of my favorites.
Like, you had to do some work to get it online, and
it promotes a lot of good things.
It promotes long games also, right? Like, nobody's
not that long though. Like, kind of longish, but you don't want to wait forever. It helps you get it over with, even though it promotes you not being hyper all in fast.
Yeah,
it's variance in gameplay. It naturally has a lot of incentive of why you wouldn't just play 4 copies, even though it's good. It you can set it up. The other person's decisions, they matter. It's actually a pretty dope design.
Yeah. Although, I guess, do you remember the green-white Nykthos Mastery deck? Those games never ended.
That wasn't good. Nykthos was like the juice, right? But the enchantment that like let you play cards off the top of your deck
and gain life
as tutus, that card was like more of the problem, and then also part of the problem was that there was too much of an imbalance of what kinds of interaction was like viable in the format. I for one though am extremely enthusiastic about the implications of Klothys and Grey Merchant speaking to devotion and actually having more permanence on the table. I'm so ready for a break from all of this planeswalkers and card draw and counter spells and weird stuff that like graveyard recur, like there's been so much weird stuff and so much the battle isn't on the table. I'm ready for some battles on the table. And obviously it's hard to tell without very many cards in the set, as so far we've seen mostly just the cards they put in the pre-con decks, like Tree Shaker Chimera. 8/4, all creatures able to block Tree Shaker Chimera do so. When Tree Shaker Chimera dies, draw 3 cards. That's a lot of powerful stuff. 7 mana.
I mean, I feel like if you're going to jump through all the hoops to get a 7 casting cost 8/5 in play, and the thing that's most exciting about it is that it might die, that's, I don't know. I have a hard time imagining when I would ever want the Tree Shaker Chimera.
I just wish they would make more cards like this, though. I think that this is another card that, the way they've been costing it, where everything's like counterspells and card draw and planeswalkers, fatties are not going to be good in general, right? But like, there are formats in the past where Tree Shaker Chimera could be good. Imagine if Tree Shaker Chimera was an Eldrazi.
At 7? Yeah. So it would be like a World Breaker-ish type card.
Yeah, like imagine if it was just an Eldrazi. Like the only thing I had going for it is that it was that it did not count as having a color because it was the void, and it was just like 7 mana for an 8/4. All creatures able to block it must do so, and when it dies, draw 3 cards. And it happened to be an Eldrazi. I could imagine playing this, right?
I mean, as part of your like Eldrazi toolbox.
Yeah. Like if people are playing with removal where they can kill your guys, you don't think so?
I can imagine a lot of things. I'm just thinking like an Oblivion Sower does so much more work, and asks so much less. That's what I was thinking. Or like a Matter Reshaper does so much more work and just asks nothing. So I don't know. I have a hard time imagining it, but I could imagine it.
What about Terror of Mount Valus? This is the dragon that's 5 red for a 5/5 flying double strike. And when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get double strike until on a turn.
See, this card is also 7, but I feel like there are at least situations where you land it and you win the game.
Well, that's true with the Tree Shaker also. Like your opponent, let's say that the Tree Shaker, like it's very easy to see that the Tree Shaker could just devastate your opponent, right? Because if it attacks, it could kill all their guys or something, and you draw 3 cards, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be amazing, right? But if they try to kill it, you could just draw 3 cards and still get the best of it. So it's easy to imagine how Tree Shaker Chimera could be good. Terror of Mount Velis, it hits for 10. And when you play it, it has a profound impact on the game that turns if you have it set up.
If you have 10 power in play already, you just kill them, right? Like, I mean, granted, you just paid 7 for a creature. I mean, your expectation has to be that there's something good on the other end of it. But I think, like, there's just a much more direct, line between point A and point B being 0 life on the opponent, with Terror of Mount Velis and Tree Shaker Chimera. Tree Shaker Chimera, even when it's good, you still have to, juggle and kick some.
Can you imagine Terror of Mount Velis in like one of those red-green decks that's like a bunch, the type like that you'd expect Brad Nelson to be playing, like a red-green deck with a bunch of elves, maybe a small amount of burn, and then some like dragons and stuff that costs like, they go from like, maybe there's some 4-cost dragons, but it goes all the way up to like 7-cost dragons or whatever, maybe even 8, right? But like, I could imagine a red-green deck that got some amount of value out of being able to drop a Terror of Mount Velis and then just attack immediately for so much potential damage that the opponent has to throw away their board just to not die, only to then be also facing down a 10-point threat in the air from Terror of Mount Velis.
Yeah, I think that is the world would have to be very different for that to be a real consideration, but I can imagine it for sure. I mean, that's not so different than when like Brad played a bunch of pretty, when I say vanilla, I don't mean vanilla in the Magic sense, just like relatively unexciting red and white creatures, and then just randomly slammed the Immortal Sun after sideboarding. He almost won a Grand Prix that way. Or
what about 5/5, if a creature would deal combat damage to Iron Scale Hydra, prevent that damage, and put a +1/+1 counter on Iron Scale Hydra?
I mean, this card literally, like, creature combat has to be important. Like, actual attacking and blocking involving other people attacking and blocking, then this card it has text. But, like, the current shape of Standard, which is, my creatures draw a bunch of cards when they come into play, and if you have something interesting, I just brazen borrow it, or I steal them, or, I blow them up with my Ugin or whatever. Iron Scale Hydra is not a powerful card in that universe.
Definitely, but I mean, dude, I was there, man. People with Fungasaur. Now, this guy doesn't have... This is kind of a nerfed Fungasaur. You can Prodigal Sorcerer your Fungasaur. You can't Prodigal Sorcerer your Iron Scale Hydra nearly as effectively.
Maybe this guy should have, like, reach or can, like, block any number of creatures. Like, then it would be maybe more interesting. But I think as it is...
No, it would be more powerful. It wouldn't be more interesting. It's interesting as it is. It's just... It's interesting in a set that you've already got solved because of, 25 years of experience.
When are you gonna play this instead of, like, a Green Cavalier? Right? Like, a Green Cavalier is an outstanding blocker, which is what...
I'm saying that you could imagine this card being good in lots of formats that have already existed.
Oh, I see, yes. Yeah, sure. This would be the best creature in some formats.
Right. That's all I'm saying is that there's a bunch of stuff here that's really dope.
I mean, like, pre-Baneslayer Angel? Like, this would be, like, a pretty premier 5-drop. Right? Like, imagine the universe before there was Baneslayer Angel. Right? Like... all the sweet 5-drops, like all these like hasted red dragons and protection dragons and Hellkites and stuff, that all came after Baneslayer Angel. This thing is...
Dude, people have played Jungle Worm before. 5 mana, 5/4 with a drawback.
The world was a different place. My first Pro Tour people had Nettletooth Djinn in their deck. Not me. Not you.
Oh my god, did I love playing against Nettletooth Djinn people.
They had it. They were like, what are you ever going to do? And I was like, I don't know. What if I contagion that? Oh. Yeah. Your thing doesn't die. It just kills you every turn. But yeah, sure. Play Nettletooth Djinn. Northern New York team. Who had the reigning U.S. national champion on it.
So, obviously, only two big new cards today, but Klothys, God of Destiny, or Grey Merchant? Which one are you more excited for?
Oh, Klothys for sure. I thought Klothys was pretty interesting to begin with, but you really sold me. It's a ability to just drain for 2 every turn while being indestructible, and probably presenting quite a puzzle for the opponent. It's too good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously super into Klothys too. All right, dude. Happy New Year. Looking forward to spoiler season really, getting into stride. Hopefully starting next week.
Then life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge just for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got